Hello, I'm Luke Tanen, President and CEO of Chicago Innovation. Welcome to Beyond the Loop, a podcast from the Executives Club of Chicago where we explore the ideas and issues shaping Chicago and the world beyond it. Today, I'm joined by the President and CEO of World Business Chicago, Phil Clement. Phil leads the city's flagship economic development organization in advancing Chicago's position as a global business hub. Phil is also the architect of Chicago 2050, a plan for economic growth and jobs. It is the city's first comprehensive economic strategy since 2012, which provides both a near-term roadmap and a long-term vision for inclusive prosperity, innovation, and global competitiveness. And so we all know Phil as the business guy, but there's more to Phil too. And on a side note, Phil has also produced Hollywood movies, Broadway theater, written and illustrated children's books.
Yeah.
And even acted as a stuntman for a kids' game show. At least that's what the internet tells me. So he's a man of many talents, but I think those are...
doing some research.
I have done my homework for today.
Those are hard facts to find, my friend.
I know. So there might be stories for another podcast.
Okay.
But today, we are here to talk about Chicago 2050,
Yep.
a plan for economic growth and jobs. So, Phil, tell us about the plan.
Sure.
The what it is, the why you initiated it, and also the process that you took to make it, because it was very collaborative in nature.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having this conversation with me today. I love watching Chicago innovation and how it's evolved over the years. I think I've got 2 decades of experience, and one of my favorite phrases from a mentor is "From little acorns, big things come." And innovation is in the spirit of your organization, but it's also in the spirit of what you brought to Chicago. So thanks and congratulations.
Well, thank you, Phil.
On all your success. Look, the plan was needed. The last time Chicago had a plan was in 2012, and it was a pretty good one. Prior to joining World Business Chicago, when I was looking at the job, the first thing I would do is some research, and I found this great plan for economic growth and jobs, which was affectionately called PEGJ at the time, and done by the Emanuel administration. And not only was it great for Chicago, it was one of the best plans out there. It was really, really quite good and thorough. And part of what convinced me that there was a job to be done that was structured and that economic development could be put to work, because so many things in that plan have come to fruition. So that was inspiring. But at the same time, there were some, things that just lag over time, right? So words like quantum certainly weren't used, but even words like sustainability or green energy. There was also a hypothesis that I think high tides lift all ships, and that if we got the economy generating in Chicago, it would take care of all the problems and all the nooks and crannies. And we know that all 77 neighborhoods of Chicago haven't benefited from growth in the same way. And these are some things we wanted to address. So I went back and talked to the folks that were involved after getting the job, that were involved in the first one, and they were all willing to come back and revisit it. And I thought that was important to not throw out, baby in bathwater and have to do the cycle all again, but to say, knowing what we've seen since 2012, how would we revisit it? And so we had 8 of the 12 people, and the remaining 4 organizations that got involved. Tom Ricketts, who, chairman of the Cubs and owner of the Cubs, also an economist, trained both undergrad and grad at University of Chicago, became the chair of the effort. We convened probably at least 300 executives in roundtables.
I was one of those. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Okay, absolutely. I think, were you at the Wrigley Field?
I was, yeah.
Session. And then the mayor hosted them bi-monthly with different groups in different industries. And we learned a lot. It was about a 7-month effort on the research side. We employed some of the same economists. We got some new economists involved. And came up with a great plan. I think it's really, in some ways this isn't rocket science, right? You have to find those industries that you think are going to grow faster than others. Ones where Chicago has a real capability and a possibility of winning. We're already quite strong and competitively advantaged. And then because it's economic development, you also want places where there's job density and good jobs for people. And so we revisited the overall Chicago economy, found 6 industries that we felt really, really comfortable with, and then realized again, there was a gap. And some of the things that are really interesting about this work is there's three kind of bets that are being asked to be taken that you won't find in economic development work in general. One is a category called big bets. And, certainly some of that language came from our roundtables with folks like Brad Henderson over at P33. These are the things that if you're just looking at economic size and the number of jobs that are currently there or might be in 3-4 years, they might get left out. But these are transformative investments that we need to make or we're going to miss something really important for the longevity of the city. So the two big bets were clean energy and quantum. And we're making great progress. I think we're literally the center of both of those issues here in the Midwest and in Chicagoland.
I think for quantum in particular, isn't it around $1 billion that has been invested, making Chicago the leading quantum center so far in the U.S.?
Absolutely. And the thing that is the most difficult to predict is what the tail looks like on that investment, because it should be explosive, right? Quantum is one of those issues where, just generally speaking, people say, if you figure out quantum, you win. And then add the category, right? Is it national defense? Is it cancer? Is it, what issue? The thing that will be the most catalyzing event from a technology and innovation perspective is anticipated to be quantum. So that, of course, started with a national strategy that we had to win. But then, the state of Illinois and the governor of Illinois did a fantastic job of rallying the troops and saying, look, this is going to happen in the U.S. It should happen in Illinois. The mayor was behind it full force. Tony Preckwinkle, President Preckwinkle, was a catalytic investor in the project. And these are the kinds of things that have to happen if we're going to win big bets, right? You need all government aligned. You need capital that's focused and understands what they're doing. And by calling out quantum as kind of out of the noise, nope, this is one of those things that's super important, and we got to win on this. That's what a strategy is for.
Yep.
The clean energy then was kind of bundled with that notion of quantum. I think we have a saying in economic development that economic development or economic growth equals energy. It's literally just a symbiotic relationship. You can't really do one without the other. And then the fun one was a new kind of category that we created called vibrancy. And this was, as a guy who studied economics in graduate school and went to the Harris School of Public Policy, I got to nerd out on this one. But it was the idea that vibrancy is now drawing people to cities. Traditionally, there was the idea that you had to have a big, successful economy, and that then people would philanthropically be involved in vibrancy. But you see in cities like Nashville or Austin, or even, you can go back to the origins of LA, vibrancy came first and then attracted population. Detroit, another example where the vibrancy came before the economic renewal. So we know that Chicago is, winning in that. And so we took a real strong effort to focus on vibrancy in this report too. So those were the main areas.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, vibrancy, you don't see that probably in a lot of other cities' economic development strategies.
It was even tough to tackle as a topic. As we were working on the strategy, there were two things that were tough. One was trying to have a common conversation about short-term economic strategy, and then the big ideas, right? The dreaming ideas. That was tough. In a roundtable, you can't facilitate a conversation on both. And then vibrancy was one of those where I think people's thinking is stuck in that notion that it's philanthropic. But more and more core industry is transitioning to what I would call an experiential good, right? So entertainment, you would before maybe go to a movie theater. Now you go to something like at the David Byrne Experience or the Universal Horror Museum or attraction that we just recruited to Chicago. These involve the same writers that are working at marketing agencies, designers, people that might be working at the Goodman on theatrical sets. So it's kind of a virtual industry that feeds off of each other. And the unmanaged outcome is to just let it find its own way. Well, we're not doing that with manufacturing. We're not doing that with insurance and finance. Let's not do that with vibrancy either.
Yep. Well, and I know, Phil, you're a marketing by trade too.
Yes.
Your background prior
Yes.
to World Business Chicago, and I think a lot of this, both the vibrancy factor, the quantum, clean tech, and really everything in the 2050 plan is also about elevating and changing the narrative
Yes.
of the Chicago region as a true global destination and hub of innovation.
Yep.
And so I was curious to get your take on, the aspects of the plan that relate to recommendations to elevate Chicago's visibility.
Sure.
And how it's important to celebrate innovation locally and how that can help attract talent and attract capital. Because, of course, we want to grow the companies here in Chicago. We also want to attract a lot of new ones.
Yeah.
And a lot of that relates to storytelling. And I wonder, too, what advice would you give to other business leaders that you would want to unleash them as advocates and ambassadors? Because you can
Sure.
only be in so many rooms at once. So
Right.
how can the rest of us help, bring this plan to life and celebrate it?
No, and you're absolutely right. It comes down to narrative, and it's the old ad, and then she told two friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. And look, we've been trying to arm people with facts, and if Chicago's narrative could only catch up with the facts at this moment in time, all our problems would be solved. I mean, honestly, I believe that. We had the safest summer since 1965. Do people feel like we're one of the safest metropolitan cities in the country? Sort of. Sometimes they're getting there, but it's 2 years ago they didn't feel that way, and so these things change slowly. Population grew. Tourism's up. Tourism's up nowhere. I mean, just in Chicago, we have the country's busiest airport. We won the number one destination for corporate relocations in the United States.
And I think we've won that every year for a number of years now.
We're like the Bulls on site. And this is one of those things where we have a dynasty of leadership on this. And people need to have confidence in that. They need to evangelize it. Look, Midwesterns, we're so good at taking on a problem. You and I were talking before we started about the second city.
Right.
Their methodology embraces first recognition of reality and then build, right?
The yes and approach.
The yes and approach, which is a Chicago invention, right? It invented on the streets of Chicago. We do that as a city. And we spend a lot of time on that identification of what's real. And we talk about the problems and we expose the problems because we're going to work on solving them. But it doesn't help our narrative oftentimes. And I think anybody in the sector, civic leaders, when we get together now, 2 years ago, they would say, hey, how are we going to create a catalyzing event for the city again? What are we going to do about safety? Now, we start talking about the things going on in the city, and they're like, how do we get the word out?
Yep.
How can we mobilize? That notion of narrative is a really important one. I'll go back, though, to an old marketer's trick. I think a guy named Al Reese used to talk about this, is you have to have a hammer and a nail. Okay. Nail is the message. The hammer is the amplification. If you don't have the nail, you can't just hammer away at stuff, right? And right now, I think Chicago is in a great spot with its nail, right? Yep. Our message is unbelievable. From the Obama Center opening up, I mean, one of the great jokes we use quite often is, from presidents to popes, everything dope is coming out of Chicago right now.
Yeah, you got to copyright that line. So that's a good one.
Well, it's borrowed from a couple different resources, actually. Some great Chicagoans have said things really, really close to it. But I go back to that quintessential Chicago thing, which we mentioned, something like a second city. These are messages of hope. They really are. I mean, if you think of President Obama campaign, it was hope was the word.
That's right.
So, 6 of the greatest living artists in 6 different mediums might be living in Chicago right now. Like, there's more than business reality evolving out of the city. We are saying something, and we're saying it in a way that is tremendously relevant. And, in the national debate, I think in the global debate, there's a Chicago way of doing things. Now, that used to mean something different, but right now, I'd like to think
we don't need to go back to the Al Capone days.
The days, yes, yeah. But yeah, the Chicago fix is one of hope, meaning, and inclusion.
Yep.
And we need to take a lot of confidence in that. There's the idea of second to none is something that Chicagoans, I think, can embrace right now.
Yeah. And just building on all of that, I mean, to your point, there are a lot of statistics that probably people, even in Chicago, don't know, let alone people outside of Chicago. Things like, Chicago is currently almost a $900 billion GDP economy, which if it was a country, right, it would make it the 22nd largest country in the world.
Yeah, my numbers have it a little higher, actually, but
okay.
That's good.
That's good. Well, and to, the other stat that we often at Chicago Innovation like to talk about, too, is the fact that Chicago is the most diversified economy in the country, too, that no single industry employs more than 13% of the labor force, so that there's such a diverse portfolio of innovation in Chicago. And our message, just similar to yours, is, there's all kinds of opportunities in Chicago. So if you're, graduating from a university in the Midwest or on the coast, you can find an industry that you can really bounce around within across your entire career in Chicago. And there's an active startup community. One of the highest concentrated Fortune 500 corporations are headquartered here in Chicago.
Yes.
And then there's one particular stat that we're really proud of with the Chicago Innovation Award winners. So proud that we turned it into a poster and we gave it to Mayor Emanuel, and he actually framed it and put it in City Hall. And it's the fact that today we have 442 winners of the Chicago Innovation Awards, and 98% are still in business. 75 have been acquired, with Spot Hero being bought by Uber as the 75th for exit values of $158 billion.
Amazing.
And so we're always out there talking about this because we find if we're not talking about the stats and the successes and the other exits, Field Glass and Clever Safe and Tasty Trade and on and on and on, people aren't going to know about this stuff. So, it's great that World Business Chicago in particular takes those stories and these narratives to the entire world and puts the spotlight on the city.
We have a division that actually specializes in that called Innovation and Venture. And when you look at ecosystems, and our belief, and it's well covered in Chicago 2050, is that we've got to incubate and nurture startups. And so, what does that mean? You can look at some of our past successes, like an M-Hub, that spun out of World Business Chicago, an amazing organization doing incredible things. But what was that formula? Part of the formula was finding mentors, finding mentors that could provide guidance to entrepreneurs. It's incredibly important. If you're starting a business and you're going out trying to find counsel versus you're going to something once a week that has a mentor talking about how to do this successfully, it makes a huge difference. The general convening, how to find people in your supply chain or partners who have an expertise in your area. Things like an M-Hub or an incubation effort. Also find focused capital. If you've got a startup idea, and let's say it's in food innovation, and you're going out and talking to generalized capital, you're going to, it's 1 out of 20 that might be interested. If you've got a food innovation idea and you're going to capital that is focused on food innovation, totally different, right? Hit ratios high, et cetera. One of the things I love about Chicago, and having been, I think my first exposures were back at a company called Inforte that we started up in Chicago, ended up bringing it public. And it was such a wonderful place to do that. But it was because people in Chicago are so practical, right? Yeah. We kind of joke about the fact that if you're going to create a new application that's going to change the way the whole world's going to see, and you need $750 to $1 billion of startup capital, you're probably going to locate in San Francisco, and you're probably going to look for your money there. If you've got an idea of how to redesign the food supply chain, that's going to come. You probably worked at Caterpillar or one of the food industries. You got the idea there. There's a problem you're solving. There's a high yield on your response. And that is why dollars invested in Chicagoland tech startups have a higher yield. And also why I think we have more diversity in the entrepreneurs that get funded, because the ideas are practical and real.
Yep.
And, a lot of credit to you guys when when you started highlighting Chicago as a center of innovation, there weren't many people that were doing it. In fact, I think we were proud of the fact that maybe we were way more practical than innovative. But now we know that those things have to be woven together.
Yeah. And I think to that point, over the decades, there's been this great proliferation of this support system in Chicago for innovators and entrepreneurs. Because as you know, being an entrepreneur yourself, it's a lonely journey, and wouldn't it be better to have mentors and collaborators? So, and World Business Chicago puts in so many great events and programs that convene people together, and Chicago Innovation's been focused on that for 25 years now. You mentioned M-Hub, groups like P33 and 1871 and Current, I know, is another great win example.
And the spin out of World Business Chicago.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess a question for you is, how could all of these civic-minded innovation supporting groups help in this next phase, this, looking at the next 25 years with this plan?
Well, I mean, that is our secret sauce as a city, is that we have always had civic activism. I mean, you go back in the history books, and it's a lot of fun to go back in the history books and find out about the, first port we had, the first time we finally got a train stop in Chicago. It was all businessmen and business people trying to make things happen for the city. There was no government plan that made it happen. And we've always been super good at that. Also, our group has noticed, our community has noticed that there could be some things that would atrophy in civic engagement. And one of the things in our plan is to actually stimulate civic engagement, make sure it's not an accidental outcome, but a managed outcome again.
Yeah.
So in the tradition of M-Hub, we're taking that same incubation idea to civics, and we have a recommendation on Civic Hub, and it's ways to cast a broader net. Some of the things that you might notice is Chicago was built on a tradition of owner entrepreneurs. They found a company. They built a company. They were in Chicago. They stayed in Chicago. They told everybody that worked at their company they got to be civically involved. You started at the company, like, well, you pick what committee you're going to be involved in and how you're going to give money away. And there's a concern now that CEOs don't stay in the jobs as long. They might be rotating from other cities to run a global 500 company. So that connectivity may not be there. And also, we need a wider group of people that are engaged in that. So there are really structured ways that I think we can intervene, and we can build that community around something that's just so essentially Chicago. And I'd like to think that there are these things called measurable social forces, right? In the social sciences, where you can say, all right, maybe Chicago consumes less ketchup because Chicagoans don't put ketchup on a hot dog. But there are ways of measuring behavior that is different for social beliefs. And you'd like to think that if you're a Chicagoan, you don't put ketchup on your hot dog, but you also buy a ticket to something. People want to go and see things, and that's just, it's different here. And you're involved in the city. You care about the city. You're not just watching it. You're not just appreciating it. You're giving back to it, and you're working on it.
Yeah, well, there's definitely, all of us in Chicago know there's incredible Chicago pride that exists here, and that's like for your sports or for your theater or for the lake. I mean, there's so much to be excited for. You look at the restaurant scene. I mean, I'm constantly bragging about how our restaurants are better than New York City's restaurants and all these places. And you look at the James Beard Awards has come here to Chicago. So there's all these validating points that Chicago has a lot, going on for it.
We're oftentimes talking to companies that are thinking about moving to Chicago, but also to other cities. And I'll be nice. I won't name the city, but someone had we were down neck and neck, and it was a well-known metropolitan area. And I said, so why really did you pick Chicago? I think there's something other than the 5 million employees that you can draw from, et cetera. And he said, well, the city that I was looking at had no Michelin stars. And we've got over 24, I think, at this point.
And this speaks to the vibrancy part of your plan.
Yep. And, that matters.
Yep.
It matters. It matters that you can go out and experience new dynamic things that are being developed, particularly in food. I mean,
Yep.
it's something that brings people together in
Absolutely.
ways that very few other things do. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
We'd like to take a moment to thank Shure Incorporated for being a proud sponsor of the Executives Exchange podcast. Shure is the gold standard trusted by podcasters, musicians, and broadcasters all around the world. Whether you're recording at home or in a professional studio, Shure microphones deliver clear, reliable audio every time, meaning fewer distractions, better conversations, and a more polished experience for your listeners. Visit Shure.com to explore their full range of products for home use and professional media needs. Another thing that really matters to the city's future, as you know, is the infrastructure that we have here.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what, infrastructure investments, both whether it's physical or digital ones, do you feel are really important for the city to lean into to ensure that Chicago remains globally competitive?
Sure. I'll go in a couple different directions. First, energy. I mean, that's a primary piece of infrastructure. Right now, Illinois is an exporter of energy. Our neighboring states draw from energy here, but that doesn't have a long time horizon. We're growing consumption so rapidly that if we don't stay ahead on improving our grid, that could end up being a detriment to our growth. And we also know that with just the geopolitical situation, we need to find out ways to locally generate clean energy, incentives, getting people thinking about the clever ways we can address that would be great. We have actually utilities that are thinking about that strongly, but we're going to have to embrace things like nuclear power and some of the ideas that are there, some of the biodigestive ideas that are really thrilling because they can produce a lot. So that's one area. I think we've got to keep our eye on the ball with energy. The other one is it's just the old truth that we're in the middle of the country. And if you look at an additional layer to that, we are in the middle of the continent. So Mexico and Canada as trading partners are as important as anybody else globally. In fact, combined, they're the most important trading partners that we have. So that center location with those great airports, with the ability to move products and people from planes to trains and get them on the highways, super important. So anything around high-speed rail, we got to embrace. Anything about helping those airports expand, we got to embrace. Bimodal, which is the activity of taking goods from one form of transportation and putting it in another. It takes a lot of space, generally needs some infrastructure behind it. Those are other things that we need to really focus on making sure that we secure. I love the high-speed rail, and I think there's some big ideas coming soon. What we just did with merging the transit systems in the region, so CTA, RTA, Metra, all coming together under one pass, right? It was just intuitive. Like, why do you have to buy 5 different tickets every time you would move from one train system to another? I think that the idea of a common transit system that is meant for people and products will be the thing we're evolving to over the next 10 years.
Yep.
And immediate progress will be made on that. I think you can expect some big announcements.
Yep, that's great. Well, and Phil, as you were talking about the fact we're in the middle of the continent, and it reminded me too that something that is unique to Chicago, which no other city can claim, because it would be impossible for them to recreate this, is our geography.
Yeah.
And then I think this relates also to the clean tech aspect of the climate plan. So, for example, I believe that I think it's 87% of North America's fresh water, Chicago is like right adjacent to, right? All these lakes. And as data centers and other things are popping up, water is important for technology, but water is also mostly important for us and our survival.
Yes.
And drinking and fueling so much life on this planet. And so I was wondering, how does the topic of geography play into your thinking on the future of the local economy. And I'm assuming that when, CEOs of big companies, you're talking to them and they're thinking about making big investments that, might have an impact over 50 years.
Yeah.
They want to know that their company is not going to be in a place where rising tides are going to,
earthquakes, fires,
exactly. And that people
hurricanes,
will be happy to live in Chicago because the shifting climate is not going to affect Chicago in the same way as perhaps some other places.
Who would have ever thought that weather would become one of our key competitive advantages?
Exactly, right.
But Chicago is, increasingly, they call it a weather safe haven, and meaning that it's predictable. And that's super important when you think about risk and you think about insurance and the cost and the availability of insurance. You mentioned my former work as a CMO. I spent 13 years at Aon, which is a global risk advisor.
Well, I know you're a lifelong environmentalist too.
And
so these are a couple of your passions coming together.
These all come together. The great news is not only do we have that water proximity, we are proceeding with care when it comes to water. We are not using it as an endless resource. People do come here to use water as a utility because of its availability, but we have a lot of controls in place, and people aren't using water irresponsibly. It's got to be net positive for the lake. That's a really important premise. But on top of it, then as fresh water becomes a more and more important variable, why would we not be the global leaders on the topic?
Yep.
And so it's just another reason to look at our region. So you've got that weather safe haven, you got a leadership in water, and then we have these great engineering and thoughtful institutions like Northwestern, University of Chicago, Argonne, Fermi Labs that are doing unbelievably compelling work in sustainability. So 2 summers ago, we hosted the SRI conference and we hosted Aspen Ideas. We've created our own climate week. People come to Chicago to talk about sustainability. I don't think we've fully recognized yet how important it is that we are actually that garden city by the lake, but it is more and more going to be part of our identity.
Yeah, if no one has trademarked the phrase Silicon Valley of the blue economy, I think Chicago should do that. So we'll get an IP attorney on it.
Go for it. I think we've already got Quantum Shore out there too as another one, which I just love.
Yeah,
and kind of going back to your notion about the diversified economy, it is interesting to talk about how we name things. It's when you say LA, you think of an industry.
Yep.
When you say San Francisco, you think of an industry. New York, an industry. Chicago is industry, right? We don't have that single thing. Which means that we have to be more purposeful about communicating how industry works together and how that we communicate with each other and work together. I think it's a fundamental strength if you think about diversification from risk. And then you have a writer's strike. Something happens in LA different than it would happen in Chicago.
Yep.
But even more importantly, when we talk about safe fast landings for companies coming from out of country, they look at Chicago and they go, oh, that fresh water thing's amazing. Wait, you've got 5 million people? Wait, your economy is bigger than Sweden's?
Yeah. 145,000 graduates every year?
Every year, right? And I can find customers. So if you're in the tech industry and you're in a tech destination, you're only talking to other tech companies. If you want to apply your tech to agriculture or to finance, you walk across the street in Chicago. You find those customers that help you incubate your products and to build. And that's one of the things you have done so well, is brought across the system companies together to help and nurture and work with entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Well, and bringing up the private sector, I think is a really critical piece of this whole puzzle.
Yeah.
So I think what's unique about World Business Chicago too is that it's a public-private partnership organization, and is the most significant one with the biggest staying power. And you've done a great job of getting the private sector to really get engaged with, oftentimes government-associated type of work.
Sure.
So what would be your thoughts on kind of the role that the private sector can play with supporting and scaling all the innovation that's connected to the 2050 plan? I think of things like mentorship, knowledge, capital, customers. There's a lot that the private sector brings to the table.
Yeah, well, actually, fundamentally, I believe that is our biggest asset. And the fact that the people that are involved in business in Chicago are also civically minded, right? That's something that you just can't beat. If you look at the public-private partnership, something like World Business Chicago, for about every dollar we get in government funding, we raise about 5 from private industry. And that combined power of government and business working together has just a tremendous amount of knock-on effect, right? And I actually would put it the other way. I can't imagine making any of these changes without private industry, without those individual entrepreneurs making decisions to better themselves, to provide jobs, maximize what the city can do, how we can work together to create an ecosystem that grows and thrives. That's the center of Chicago. That's one of the things that is our personality.
Yep.
That's why we're the city that works.
Exactly.
That's why we build better together. I mean, you just go through the language of the city of broad shoulders. You think of all the ways people have described the city. It is industry. It's people working together across those, institutions.
Yep. Well, and to that topic, as you look at the future of the city, and so it's people who are probably, 8 years old, 14 years old. We're talking about the year 2050. So those are the humans who will be leading the charge, 25 years from now, or at least very active in all these very exciting industries that you're talking about, quantum and clean tech.
Yeah.
And so this vision, if all this happens, it sounds wonderful, but I know you're passionate about this too. If it leaves people behind and they're not able to participate in all of this exciting stuff, then that's also not good for Chicago. So I think this also dovetails the topic of what does the future workforce look like? And what are the skills that you think people, need today to be the innovators of tomorrow?
Sure. And I would say that issue of equity is probably the single thing that haunts us the most as a city. And if you look at the compounded impact of that variable, it's the thing that holds us back the most. So we have to address it. We have to seriously make some sacrifices and think about issues in new ways. Our old thinking isn't going to solve the problem, and it hasn't. We keep going back to the ideas and ways of framing it that we've had for 100 years, and it's going to require something completely different. On workforce, I will confess that's a hard one, right? We don't know what people are going to need 5 years, 10 years from now, but we do know that we need agility, right? And right now, workforce programs are kind of designed, if you talk to someone who runs a university, for example, they'll tell you, they look at economic reports, they'll find out where the gap is. They'll say, oh, you know what? We need a course that trains EMTs because there's a shortage. Then it takes them some time to decide to build the program, design curriculum, hire professors and teachers, test the material in a way that it's certified. Then students have to apply, et cetera. So what they suggest is that it takes about 5 years to answer a problem out of economic data. If you look at AI, you look at the way we're understanding these trends and being more predictive, and that kind of bid-ask system for workforce and what's needed in the economy, we can get ahead of it. I'd like to think that we could be predictive 2-3 years in advance and get our academic systems and our training systems ahead in that way. The reality is if we could even reduce it to 1 year, that would be a huge win. there is about the same number of people looking for jobs as there are jobs in Chicago right now. So if we can just figure out how to map and better train and make good matches, again, it's a simple way to solve some of our biggest problems.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is probably just exposing young people to all of these exciting things that are in the 2050 plan. Because if they don't know what quantum is or means, they're not going to learn skills that make them relevant to work in that industry.
And you do this, and this is great. I mean, we are constantly providing tours of employment areas where people can go and see, oh, this is what, for kids, we work with CPS quite often, and we take them to hospitals to see what does a medical job look like.
Yep.
We take them to software companies to understand what a tech job looks like. And that exposure is a super important piece of what we're doing.
Yeah. And young people are just naturally curious. So they're hungry to learn and to grow and to, use those skills to be creative. And it's something that, us for many years have been doing this program, the Illinois Student Invention Convention.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is just, and the things that kids create, also when you're really young, you don't know what is not possible.
Right.
Yeah. You kind of think like, anything could be possible. So it's about harnessing that creativity and that curiosity, but harnessing it towards, industries and workforce.
Yeah.
And, there's so many great, I think Chicago is such an abundance of workforce development organizations, all kinds of nonprofits and civic groups, skills for Chicagoland's future, IC Stars, or work that P33 is doing just to support Discovery Partners Institute. And so it seems as though there's a lot of goodwill and desire and ambition. And I've even heard that they're looking into for Chicago public schools an AI and quantum curriculum.
Yes,
which would be pretty game changing.
Yes,
and so
look, I think that this is the idea that time has come. It starts torn at the top. I mean, the mayor is unbelievably committed to youth engagement. I think he wakes up in the morning thinking about that kid that might get in trouble, who needs a job, who needs infrastructure support, needs someone to tell them that we care about them. And you see the orchestration of that effort across the city. And it's one of the things that I love about working with City Hall right now is that is the tone. Is to get in there to help the kids, make sure that we reduce violence and particularly the tendency or temptation to go astray. And it's super relevant.
Taking it back big picture for a moment. So Chicago is competing against, you mentioned, other cities, whether you can name them or not. We collaborate with some, we compete with some. We're all on Team America, I suppose.
Yeah.
But absolutely, whether it's a New York or a Boston or San Francisco, we're trying to increase our mind share in the minds of these other, whether it's young people or CEOs, to come to Chicago. What would you say really differentiates Chicago's innovation ecosystem, and how could we further amplify that?
Sure. Look, I think the presence of our incredible academic institutions it's just remarkable, right? The footprint that we have. And then the students that come in, I love the fact that almost every summer, towards the beginning of the summer, we see an alarming article that unemployment's gone up. And it's literally 140,000 students that show up in Chicago every year, get absorbed into the economy by November. And usually we're kind of like, oh, well, the unemployment's gone down. And this kind of infusion of well-trained youth every year is great. And some of that's local. I mean, this is not just people moving to Chicago. These are people who maybe were at the community colleges in Chicago. And what was great was they were also interviewing while they were in school so that they find that job and stay in Chicago after they graduate. That you can't do that. It's more difficult to do that if you're sitting in Ohio or Indiana, finding that job in Chicago. But then they move here and find that job. I think that is one of the most important issues. We call it College Town USA. It's just a factor that you come here because you're going to find other students like you know, people who are starting out in your career, and we're wildly affordable compared to any other metropolitan area.
Yeah, and I've heard that Wrigleyville has more 20-somethings per block than any neighborhood in America.
I don't know that step, but I believe it. You know, population density down just off the Mag Mile is the most dense of any city in the country as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big part of our innovation advantage. I think success, continuing to do what you do, where you kind of, you bag it, you tag it, and you evangelize it, and you show people, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what other people have done. Continuing to convene. We are going to continue to have those conversations with capital. We've started an effort called Shy Forward, where we're bringing investments from Chicago out to capital globally to say, these are the ways other people have been successful. This is how you can be successful as an investor. You know, kind of just continuing those motions are important to us.
Yeah, it reminds me years ago, our co-founder, Tom Kuzmarski, and myself, and
one of my favorite guys in the world.
He's one of a kind.
Yeah.
And then also our VP of Events and Marketing, Paul Kitty, and a couple others collaborated on a book called Rising Together, the story of Chicago's innovation ecosystem, because we knew that Chicago had a different vibe, that there was something unique to it. We wanted to really catalog it and, to your point, capture it and put it out there.
Yep.
So we interviewed 30 of some of the most successful Chicago innovators over the past couple decades. And we asked them, like, tell us about your perspectives on Chicago's innovation DNA. And we distilled it to what we call the Chicago way, where each letter stood for something different.
Okay.
And I think you'll agree with me, but tell me if you think any of these are off base. The first C was collaboration. So there's an incredible
I was going to guess that.
collaborative spirit.
We could have done this as a magic trick.
Yep.
What card do you got?
And then the H was humility.
Yep.
It's the people who are at the top. It's not like a ego-driven CEOs all over the city.
Yep.
There's a great humility to a lot of leaders that we see. I is inclusion. Mm-hmm. And to your point from about 5 minutes ago, just clearly your passion and others for wanting to include, and how can we do that? And like really being driven by figuring that piece out.
Yep.
The other C in Chicago was for calculated risk taking.
Okay.
And this goes back to what you were saying before. You know, we're not looking for moonshots, but Chicago gets a lot of singles, doubles, triples, and some home runs too.
Yep.
And combined, they all put runs on the board. It's not just swinging for the fences all the time.
No.
And then the G and I forgot the A. I got to make sure I know how to spell Chicago if I'm going to tell the story. The A is for altruism, and it's the sense of giving back. And so many people who've had lots of success then go on to invest in other innovators, invest in startups, mentor, and just give back to the community. The G is for grit. So that's our, 0 degree winters. You got to be gritty.
Yep.
And it speaks to the history.
Work ethic.
Absolutely, right. And then the last O is openness. Okay. And we're a sanctuary city. We're open to all kinds of people. And, the city way back when was built by a lot of immigrants. And we've always been embracing of newcomers coming to Chicago. So how does that jive with sort of
perfect.
what you see?
It's perfect. We actually, it's funny because we just started what we call the WBC leadership model, which is an internal model for how we want to behave and create legacy for the people who work there. And we also have a Chicago acronym. And I would say 4 of those are exactly the same, and all of them are captured in different ways.
Yep.
There is, if you ask 100 people to talk about Chicago for 10 minutes, you're going to find those themes. Yep. Right? You're going to just find a consistency, and we're we got that work ethic, we got that openness, we're collaborative in ways that we're proving what collaboration can look like. In a world that is polarizing right now, I honestly feel like you mentioned the kids that are going to grow up and what are they going to say in 2050. I'm thinking that in 2050, there are going to be 25-year-olds that are going to say, oh man, you guys were so lucky. You were in Chicago when this artist was working and this artist was working and this idea hadn't come to fruition yet. And we are on the precipice of a renaissance that I think we can be very proud of what's happening in the city. Yep. And I'm very excited about what we're going to produce for that next group.
Yeah, well, I'll add another O, which is optimism. I think that's a big part of it too. Well, Phil, this is my last question because I got to let you go. to plan the future of Chicago for the rest of us. So my question is, what would you say are the highest impact innovation investments or policy shifts that you think need to happen in the next 5 to 10 years to ensure that we're on this track, that the vision that this plan puts forth, that we are indeed moving in that direction?
So there are so many nuanced policy issues that we need to go after. I mentioned some of them, like transportation and energy policy, et cetera. But I'll take the challenge. I'll boil it down to one. It's that narrative. If we change the narrative, what that does is it convinces people that taking the risk is worth it, that we are changing, that we are making constant forward progress. And people need to take sanctuary in that. They need to know that that's the case and go out and produce in a million different ways. A place like Chicago is huge. It's complex. We need everybody firing on all cylinders. And I do believe that narrative and that confidence that we are winning encourages people to take bigger bets.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I guess a good call to action for all you listeners out there is download the plan. It's on the World Business Chicago website. You can read it, or you could also do what I did once, which was I used Notebook LM and I turned it into a 20-minute podcast. Not as good as this podcast, of course, but
sure.
But it was an interesting way to listen to all the great ideas that are in the plan.
And one more plug,
please.
So we also have a contest going, which probably by the time this is released, you may be able to go to the Chicago Cultural Center and see the big ideas that we've sourced from all over Chicago on how to transform. As I mentioned in the Chicago 2050 plan, it was hard to have an economic conversation and a big idea Burnham type conversation that stirs people's souls at the same time. And right now we are doing that contest to get the big stir your soul ideas.
And what's the contest called?
It is called New Horizons, and it is also another thing well worth looking up, because anyone listening to this podcast is for sure a Chicago junkie. And I think the 16 articles that are in the Tribune that have been done in tandem are remarkable, really getting Chicagoans to think about the future of the city.
Yep.
And that's been coinciding with this great contest. And the ideas are amazing.
I know. I've been following El Ramel's LinkedIn posts lately, and I'm seeing all these incredible illustrations of these different corridors of Chicago completely transformed. And I was looking, I'm like, oh, that's a really nice photo of probably somewhere in Italy, I guess. It looks like that cobblestone streets, and look at all these cool, restaurants and vendors. And it's like, no, this is a way to reimagine this part of the city. So something to look forward to.
Yep.
Thank you, Phil, for being a fantastic guest and leader.
And I think we'd be remiss if we did not say a big thank you to the Executives Club for how they are continuing this dialogue, and how lucky are we to be able to have this conversation as their guests.
Absolutely. Well, there's few groups like the Executives Club that can convene leaders on so many kinds of topics. And I think what's special about Chicago is the connective tissue that we have here. And I'd argue that the Executives Club and World Business Chicago and groups like Chicago Innovation are part of that connective tissue that keep the whole ecosystem going.
Yeah.
So, Phil, thank you again for being a great guest and leader in the city. For more conversations with innovative and dynamic leaders from Chicagoland and beyond, follow the Executives Exchange podcast on your podcast app or subscribe on YouTube. Until next time.